Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I've got a special guest to the channel, Mike Ladano from Grab a Stack of Rock. How are you, mate?
Doing real good. How about you?
Not too bad, mate. The premise of this show is I select a record that is in a genre that is completely outside your wheelhouse. I get you to furiously listen to this record. Just tell us what you think of it. Maybe it might turn you into a fan, turn you into a genre of music, etc., etc., etc. So today's album, and I will put it up as a screenshot, is the controversial, groundbreaking, and arguably one of the greatest metal albums of the 80s, Slayer, Rain and Blood. So this came out in 1986. There you go. This was 29 minutes of hellish mayhem from Slayer on the Def Jam label. I mean, anytime there's a list of 100 greatest metal albums of all time, Mike, this is always right up in the mix. Very influential. A lot of folks believe this was the starting point for thrash metal because previous to that, and we'll get a little bit more into the genesis of this band and the sound, but previous to that, there was a lot of new wave of British heavy metal. There was a lot of the traditional metal, speed metal. But with this particular album, planted the seed for a whole different genre of music like thrash metal. So, Mike, I'll throw it over to you. Prior to this exercise, what was your encounters with Slayer, if at all?
Kind of minimal. I was familiar with the track Seasons in the Abyss from when I was a kid, and I really liked it. I was familiar with one of the riffs from Angel of Death, which we'll get into later on, and I liked that. Um, for the most part, I would have been exposed to Slayer via my friends at an annual summer barbecue that we do, where they do like a 100 song countdown, and inevitably Slayer would be two or three tracks of that 100 song countdown every summer. But that doesn't mean that it's stuck in my head. It just means that I was there thrashing with the boys, drink in hand, we're having a good time at this barbecue, banging heads. Doesn't mean I remembered the songs after the fact. So now I have done this deep dive into Rain and Blood, and I'm much more familiar with the Slayer sound than I was a week and a half ago.
Yeah, I'll take that one step further. So they regard the big four as Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, and Megadeth. Were you familiar with those other bands, and were you a fan of those other bands?
Yeah, funny enough, I got into Metallica sometime around the time of Load, Megadeth shortly thereafter, Anthrax, same deal. I was really into Testament for a while too in the 90s when they came out with their Ritual album because I thought that was more mainstream rock and I was really into that. So, but I was getting more into these bands as they were becoming more their mainstream sides of things. And Slayer never they never had that moment where they became a mainstream sounding band. The other ones certainly did. Megadeth certainly did a hard rock album with Cryptic Writings. Um, so minimal kind of exposure to the big four. Metallica was the band that I kind of went all in on, and I went back and I bought everything from Kill 'Em All to the entire catalog. But my favorite stuff wasn't necessarily Kill 'Em All. It was the stuff that came after.
Yeah, so just a little bit of context for the folk. Mike is a very hard rock guy, so you were listening to probably a lot of melodic hard rock and metal up to prior to the 90s, because we're of a similar age. So would that be fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. When I was in high school, which would have been in the late 80s, I was very much, Kiss, a lot of White Snake and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
then I was getting more interested in heavier music in the 90s and more musicianship. So, Dream Theater, Queensryche, a lot of Iron Maiden and Judas Priest.
Yeah. So prior to me giving you this exercise, and I said, look, I'm going to assign Slayer, Rain and Blood. What did you expect before putting the CD for the first time? What did you expect to hear?
Yeah, absolutely. I expected hardcore satanic lyrics and other graphic horror kind of lyrics, which we certainly get in spades.
Hmm.
I expected a lot of amazing drumming from Dave Lombardo, a guy that I've always wanted to listen to. I think I have him on the odd release here and there. He's worked with Mike Patton and whatnot. But maybe it's more about what I got that I didn't expect, which was the speed, the relentless speed. I didn't see that coming. Like I knew Seasons in the Abyss, I knew that wasn't as heavy as Slayer got, but I did not know. I had no idea that they made an album this relentlessly fast through and through with, a couple time changes here and there, but otherwise it's, Lombardo, do, 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 do. And it's Araya just spitting the words out. So, there's a lot that surprised me rather than, I had minimal expectations. I expected thrash metal with a great drummer, and I didn't really know what else to expect. I got a
Yeah,
lot. I got a lot.
yeah, absolutely. And just one more thing to check out, because this is another influence that comes into the Slayer story. Did you have any liking for punk or hardcore punk, or any sort of experience with hardcore punk?
Peter, I like to dabble a little bit in every genre. Hardcore punk wasn't really my thing. My friend Aaron, he made me a Black Flag mix CD. I played it once. I like the Sex Pistols. I like, some Ramones. I like some Clash, but I don't really go hardcore punk. No.
Yeah, well, I think it's an important question because it's not just metal that influences and indexes this band. There's also a punk element, and we'll get into that as we go deeper into the tracks and the whole Slayer story. All right, well, maybe a little bit of admin, and then we can just get into the album. So this was recorded between January and March 1986, 5 weeks in LA and New York. It's 29 minutes. It's a very economical album. There's absolutely no fat whatsoever. Um, this was a very controversial album. It was signed to the Def Jam label. Rick Rubin was the producer. And a lot of people say this is one of his masterworks. So we all know Rick Rubin for the work he's done with greats like Johnny Cash, Neil Diamond, etc., etc., Red Hot Chili Peppers, Black Sabbath. It was engineered by Andy Wallace. He was the producer of the great album Jeff Buckley Grace and also the engineer of Nirvana Nevermind. So he's got some pedigree as well. So you had some blue chip folks that were working on this album. Again, just reinforcing, it was signed to the Def Jam label. CBS were distributing Def Jam, but when the hierarchy got wind of some of the more controversial lyrics of this album, especially Angel of Death, they dropped Def Jam. Well, they dropped this album. They were not willing to distribute it. So Geffen picked it up in the US and they signed with Rick Rubin. So it reached gold certification finally, I think in the early 90s. It hit number 94 and also UK number 47. So Kerrang gave it 5Ks. It had mixed results. More the mainstream press initially thought it was a dunderhead, um, sort of stupid album, which was kind of typical of a lot of the mainstream press with metal. But over time, a lot of the metal, the more mainstream press, look at this album is groundbreaking and one of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time. But the metal press were they praised this album to the skies. They thought this was quite outstanding. This was a very much a step up in sound quality from Slayer. So how I got into Slayer was their early albums like Show No Mercy. Now, the tunes on this album are great. They're fast, they're furious, they've got a lot of punk energy, but it's very garagey. And you can tell they're on the Metal Blade album, and you can tell the limitations of budget. The sound quality on this album is just, it's like night and day. So you've really got a blue chip production, and we'll talk about that more carefully as we get in through the show. Other compilations like this, Speed Kills the Very Best and Speed Metal on Music for Nations, introduced me to a lot of these different bands like Megadeth, Metallica, but Slayer were always piqued my interest because there was something that was very pure about them. It was sort of like Judas Priest on amphetamines, but had this dark, sinister lyrical tone about them, like Merciful Fate, and also a little bit of a punk energy. It was very fast and furious. So I was very interested in this album and I lived through it in the day. And when I got it for the first time, wow, it was like a nuclear bomb had gone off. So A little bit of preamble. I'll put some more stuff as we go through the show. You put the CD in, put the headphones on. Tell us, what was your first impression?
That opening shriek of Tom Araya took me so much by surprise because that's the first thing out of his mouth on this album, on Angel of Death. And yeah, I was like, okay, okay, I dig it. It's not what I expected. I dig it. That was kind of a brave thing there, I think. It's kind of out of the blue and not, it's not his style at all. And then we this riff and this tempo and I was like, okay, I'm digging this. I'm digging this. And then the lyrics start, and I was like, oh, okay, this is the song that I remember reading about. This is the song about Joseph Mengele. And I've certainly studied my World War II history and whatnot. And this song is like graphic but accurate. Um, One thing I like about heavy metal music, and I have always liked about heavy metal music, is that there's bands like Iron Maiden that teach you about history. And in Slayer, maybe that wasn't their goal. I think their goal here was maybe to make you freak out a little bit. But hey, you want to learn some history? There's some Angel of Death right there. Um, Tom Araya's delivery throughout the album. This is not. I mean, I think we can say that there's a certain monolithic quality to this album. Okay, I feel like as I was listening to it, I was listening to one big long piece, broken up in spots a little bit, but I felt like I was listening to almost like a concept album, a 29-minute long song in a sense. And Araya's delivery throughout is strong. It is got the right amount of grit without going overly growly. He's got the cadence is in sync with the rhythms of the song. And those the riffs are fast and like a blur, but they're consistent. And it's like there's a few times where you slow down a little bit, and there's a few times where Slayer breaks into a groove, but I'm banging my head. And I'm listening to this album, two times inside of an hour, a couple of times a day doing that. Um, I liked the fact that it's so short and you can just, hit that repeat button and go again because there's so much being thrown at you so fast on this album. Um, anyway, in short, that's my first impression. Like speed, Araya, and one other thing too. The guitar solos. I don't know who's playing them, Carrie or Jeff. I have no idea. But there's a lot of these really aggressive, abrasive, high-pitched, squealy guitar solos. Very, very fast, almost like razor blades. And I think if you've ever heard the band Fight, Rob Halford's band Fight, he had a guitar player named Brian Tills. He totally ripped off that guitar playing style from Rain and Blood. Like I hear so much of that. I was like, oh, I know this sound. I know it from Fight. No, I know it from Slayer, apparently. So, and of course, that they were a big influence on Rob Halford in the early '90s, anyway. So, I guess that sums
Yeah.
up my first impressions.
Well, isn't that funny? Because Judas Priest were an influence on Slayer. So when you look at the influences of Slayer, you had Judas Priest, Merciful Fate, and Dead Kennedys. That really angry, not the poppy punk, but Jeff Hannahan said the real sort of angry punk. And what's the difference between speed and thrash metal? Because speed metal was kind of in vogue in the early 80s, but this album took it into another genre, which is like thrash. So speed was kind of 4/4 time, but it was played at punk tempos, really, really up. But thrash was different because he had a lot of different time signatures and weaving guitar lines. Because you listen to these songs, there's so many time signature changes within the song, and it goes in all different directions, all in 29 minutes. It's just, there's nothing that outstays its welcome. And it's really interesting that you say, because you've listened to the CD, and I'm used to the album and the CD. Um, I can get where you sort of think, oh, it's like a concept album and it's like one piece which is interrupted with, some changes, like little breaks in between the songs. They never had that in mind. It just kind of landed that way. So the thing that the first thing I heard when I heard this album was that scream. I think that's one of the most iconic metal screams in the history of rock and roll. And just the drumming on this album, it it sounds real because you listen to a lot of proto thrash metal or speed metal bands or heavy metal bands. The double kick is very clinical, and but you listen to this album and you can feel that there is actually a person behind the kit. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of modern metal is just, it's too mechanical, but you can feel the sweat and the energy. And I think this is some of the greatest thrash or heavy metal drumming committed. It's just wonderful, especially in that song with Angel of Death, where it's 4 minutes 25 and the guitars are off and there's this little kick solo at the end. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah,
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 love that bit. Love that bit.
absolutely. Um, the lyrics got, this is the controversial song. And the controversy is it's putting it in a third person to a first person narrative, and it's just being factual. And a lot of people misinterpreted that they were Nazi lovers and they were sympathizing, and the band was saying that we're not, everyone knows that Angel of Death, this guy was evil and bad, but we just don't say it in the lyrics because it just would be saying Angel of Death, bad person. It's just a narrative, it's telling a story and it's factual. And a lot of this album is very much on the dark side of life. And that's what art is. Art's not happy, clappy, blue skies and sunny days all the time. This is a very dark album. It talks about warfare, it talks about hell, it talks about punishment, it talks about anger. And a lot of people gravitated to it. And that's what art's all about. Goes back to the days of Shakespeare and prior, light and shade.
If I
And
may add something here, Peter,
sure,
when I listened to this album, I understood for the very first time in my 52-year-old life, I understood for the very first time why there was a satanic panic in the 80s. Like, if you look at a guy like Ozzy, he's clearly clowning around. You look at this and you're not sure. You're not sure. And I can imagine parents hearing this and freaking the heck out. I understand it now.
100%. And you can understand why CBS dropped them because they had a lot of controversy. So Ozzy was on their register, and he had the dove biting incident. There were lawsuits with Judas Priest and Ozzy against them in regards to teenage suicide cases. They were copping a lot of flack. In the 80s, it was a very conservative period of time in the world and in America. And this album was cited in Tipper Gore's wonderful book or essay on the filthy albums of its day.
Diatribe.
Yeah,
Diatribe.
yeah, absolutely. So it was a different time and place, but now, you know, it's a
I
different
just
world.
uh I just placed myself in my poor mom's shoes for a moment while I was listening to this, and I'd be like, yeah, if I was my mom, I'd be freaking out when I was a kid. For sure. I mean, this is serious material here. There is no clowning around on Rain and Blood.
It's
Not
not it's not comic book horror either. The
no,
lyrics are
no.
it's very wordy. They actually said they got the thesaurus out, and these guys, you look at them and you think they're dunderheads, but they're not. They're quite smart. No.
Yeah.
So they knew what they were doing. I just think these are all stories. These are all tales, and it is what it is. I know it's a cliche, but it is what it is. I think you talked about the unrelenting. There's also moments where there are quieter moments, there are different tempos. I've got to talk about the production. What do you think of the
Yes.
production? I think it's stunning.
Okay, so like I like a lot of the albums that Rick Rubin has produced. I think a lot of them sound great. I've always been skeptical about how much of that actually had to do with Rick Rubin, but I think back in this day, I'm sure his hands were on the console. They had to be back then.
And he was a fan. He loved
Yeah.
this band. So I think he had a little bit of fire in the belly.
I hear a lot of what I like about Rick Rubin. He gets a great drum sound out of bands in general. He gets a sharp, cutting edge sound out of guitars. He doesn't forget about the bass, and he leaves space in the back. Like there's space between what's going on here, which is a remarkable thing for an album of this speed. But you can hear some separation between the lyrics, between the instruments. I really think this is a great production. As for is it his very best compared to, I don't know, Beastie Boys, Run DMC? I don't know. I couldn't say. But as far as some of the metal stuff that I've heard him produce, I think this is absolutely top notch. Um, just one of those albums, maybe Slayer made technically better sounding albums later on in their career. I don't know. I'm curious to explore, but the technically better sounding albums don't necessarily have that punch and impact of the early, more raw productions like Rain and Blood. And I'm really drawn to it. I think it's one of those albums you can hear there's something very special going on. And there's obviously a lot of care taken in the studio because, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of those early thrash albums from this era were much more garagey. This is certainly not garagey. This is you can tell it was put together with care. You can tell that they made sure that these songs were tight and recorded tightly. I don't know how many takes it might have taken to get Slayer to record this tightly, but whatever it took, there was no compromise. There was no, oh, that's a good enough take. Um, and finally, as far as production goes, when you have a band like this, for me, there's not a lot of melody going on. So the vocals have to be delivering something else. And Rick Rubin obviously pushed Tom Araya to be extremely expressive with every single line of lyric so that there is something memorable about every part of every song, even though there's no melody really. You're getting something performance wise out of Araya throughout. And I think that has a lot to do with Rick Rubin just pushing those artists to get something special out of. I mean, that's what a producer does, right? He doesn't just let the guys play and say, that's good enough. No, he pushes and he pushes until they've got it perfect. And
Yeah,
in
he
many
did push.
regards,
He did
yeah,
push. He did
you can
push
hear it.
because
You can hear it.
he was a fan of the band, and I think that's important because I think a lot of his, I think he became a bit lazy, Ruben, in a lot of his, especially
Uh-huh.
Red Hot Chili Peppers towards the end. I mean, it's wonderful that he was able to convert them from a party on your pussy type band into something a little bit more serious. But towards the end, I think he just turned up, got his paycheck, and just sat in the chair, arm folded, and go, "Yeah, that's a take, lads." This band, you could tell him that he had an invested interest, and he is on record that he wanted to capture the sound that they had in practice. So he wanted to capture a live sound. It was sort of Marshalls in your face, close miking of the drums, no echo. There's very little reverb. And I've read stories that there were a couple of bits and pieces where the band was at loggerheads, about reverb. But there's about that much reverb on the album, which is unique for an 80s production. What he wanted to sort of have come out of this album was like being punched in the face, like a boxing match. And I think he succeeds. The bass slash guitar were recorded live in the studio. Um, a lot of the band has a bit of a laugh on this one. They said if the songs were played at half speed, it would equate to two Sabbath records. I found that quite humorous. No fat, so economical. It's just one of those albums that it just doesn't outstay its welcome, like Necrophobic, 1 minute 40.
Yeah.
It just zooms. So I think this is a groundbreaking album, and Rick Rubin brought this genre of music into sophistication, into technology. And as you rightly said, the separation of instruments is just stunning. Even though it's fast and furious, you can hear the space between the notes. It's wonderful. Um, Another thing I want to unpack what you said. I think Tom's vocals previously, when he used to do those previous delivery of vocals, like on albums like this, he'd be singing at a thousand miles per hour, but the diction was always a little bit garbled. In this one, you can actually hear him articulate the words, even though he's delivering them at a thousand miles per hour. It's wonderful. So you can hear everything he says. So, um, alrighty. So maybe we'll cover a couple of songs. Let's highlight a couple of songs for the folk.
Well, it's hard for me to talk about specific songs simply because my experience with this album was listening to it in these 28-minute chunks. But Piece by Piece, I thought was interesting. The second track, um, kind of a cool riff there. If I at least if I have the song right, but it was like a boom, boom, and again, it's the delivery, modulistic terror, a vast sadistic feast. It just and like you said, enunciation. You can hear it clearly. Makes it so much more
Articulate.
fun to listen to.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, piece by piece, I dug. Um, but
Can I
after
have a
that,
yeah, on Piece by Piece, I just wanted to chime in. What I like about that song, Mike, is the rhythms are really off kilter. It's sort of almost polka,
yeah,
Polka. It's sort of a
yeah,
little bit
yeah,
off.
yeah. I'd never noticed that before, but you're right. You're right. It does have that kind of vibe that if you slowed it down, maybe you could do a
I don't
polka
think
with it.
anything about this band is contrived. I think they're a feel
No,
band. I think, mate, they go in the studio and whatever inspires them. So I don't think
yeah.
they sit around the table, get out a pad and a pen and write down we're going to do this. I think it's just instinctive and it happens in the moment. And sometimes great heart just happens. It just happens. You just can't explain. But wow, there's just so many off rhythms. This band's like fresh jazz. Because
Really well said.
another thing you were talking about is the solos.
Hmm.
And the solos do this really weird scales, but they're like jazz scales.
They are weird scales, aren't they? Like it almost sounds skittery. That's a good word for it, I think. They sound very skittery and they don't sound
Yeah.
conventional. They sound like they're doing a lot of notes that you wouldn't normally hear.
No, no, it's not like the guitar duos of Adrian Smith and Dave Murray. It's not
No,
like
there's
KK and um, Glenn
and Glenn. To
in
use an
Judas Priest.
analogy, to use an analogy here, we have unconventional vocals here that aren't delivering melodies. So Tom Araya delivers hooks in a different way, with his expression. Same with guitar solos. They're not delivering these melodic kind of guitar solos that you usually get with our favorite metal bands, but instead they're delivering these strange, outlandish vibes. And there are hooks within there. They're hard to hum, but they are being creative with their refusal to do something like mainstream and melodic. They're still delivering you something of a certain amount of quality, something to get into your head, something to listen to grab onto and hopefully be inspired by. Like for music that is not in my wheelhouse, there's a lot here that's speaking to me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes the guitar playing would be in unison. They just play the same rhythm, the same chords. And that's kind of unique because you expect a lot of those guitar duos, they just do it in they harmonize it or they do alternate. But sometimes, like they do their own different guitar solos and it weaves, and then they'll just do a rhythm bit, which is exactly the same melody line. So it's like double tracking of the same
And it doesn't
riff.
sound like mud. Like if you and I did
Mm,
that together, we would sound like mud. It would take two extremely tight guitar players to do that and make it sound
yeah,
good.
yeah. Um, Jesus saves. So, whether this is another controversial song, and oh man, in America in the 80s, this would have been right into the, a stab in the heart of conservative,
Right.
of folk. And by the way, there are a lot of stores, a lot of record chains that just refuse to stock this record. So, very
So
controversial.
when I see this, like there's anger in these lyrics. Like I don't know the background of these guys. I'm sure that some of them were raised religiously and grew to resent it. That's usually the background of a lot of metal bands. But I see this, and there's so much resentment and hatred here. In an invisible man, you place your trust. The mockery there, like that's they're not pulling any punches here. I can see why parents were upset by this. I'm like, how
But
dare you say that? You know?
the paradox is Tom Araya is a very religious guy. He's a
I
Catholic. He
had
was
no
raised
idea.
a Catholic, and he said, quote unquote, over the years, it's become of an art to make people believe that what I'm saying, I actually believe. So he thinks he's Sir Laurence Olivier playing Hamlet. He's playing a role.
Yeah,
And a lot of
I
these
get that.
guys in this band were brought up. I think the drummer too. Dave Lombardo, religious, brought up very religious. But Tom is is a very religious guy.
I guess it's
So
worth pointing out here that Tom doesn't write the lyrics. It's Carrie and Jeff writing the lyrics, and it's not Tom's words.
so this is the whole element to the band that is that there are views, there are narratives. Not everyone believes in this narrative, but it's art. It's sort of like, you know, it's like a horror book. Like Jeff Hanahan, he was inspired by Stephen King. Kerry King, not a ferocious reader, but he said that he was a fan of horror movies.
Oh yeah.
So that's the context of this band. There's it doesn't mean that the band it's their personal philosophy. I don't think it's sort of like King Diamond, where he's actually that extra layer scary because he actually believes in the lyrics that he and follows that sort of religion, of Satanism. But this band is just it's just art. It's like dark arts, and they're putting these stories. And I think Jesus saves, whether you agree with the lyrics or not. But it's bold. Can you
Oh,
imagine
it's
conservative America in the 1980s and dropping this
no.
on
Like
a
I
made
said,
on a major and there's just so many elements to this on a rap label, Def Jam label, LL Cool J,
yeah,
Public
Run
Enemy,
DMC.
Run DMC, Beastie Boys, and Slayer. It's like the and Slayer.
Yeah,
That's it's just so bizarre.
it is. I mean, of course, there's that Kerry King crossover with the Beastie Boys "Fight for Your Right," but that was a more mainstream guitar solo. Um,
The
but
band
like I
weren't
was,
the band weren't happy about that too. They certain
they
folks within the band didn't like that, and the Beastie Boys weren't happy about that either because they looked down upon Slayer. So I think Slayer. There were some folks. There was a certain amount of elitism in the label, and they said, "Ruben, why the fuck have you signed Slayer? This is a rap label."
well,
So,
Ruben certainly he didn't stop signing rock bands, that's for sure. But
yep, that's true. That's true.
it's, I've lost track of what we were saying here. I think you were talking about Jesus Saves in the 80s. But again, I must stress that if I knew what Slayer were singing about in the 80s, I mean, if I had read these lyrics, I would have been like, okay, I guess I understand why parents. I don't support censorship or whatever, but I fully support the parent saying no to the kid if the parent feels I don't want this in my house. That's a family issue. That's nothing to do with censorship. And parents should take full ownership of what their kids are consuming as far as entertainment goes. My mom, my family, they were great. They let me make those decisions. They knew that entertainment was entertainment, and I wasn't going to go and start burning goats in the backyard. But I get it now. Like I honestly do get why there was a satanic panic because, like I said before, I was listening to these Ozzy albums, and sure, he might say some controversial things every once in a while. Miracle Man, God got busted, but I was like, this is nothing scary. This is scary.
Yeah,
This is scary.
this is a different level. I want to highlight a song which is sort of like relevant to modern times. It's like they were sort of forecasting something. You know, the song Epidemic,
Yeah,
which is about a permanent disease that eradicates most of the world.
right, right. So, they're taking inspiration from things like the Black Plague and whatnot, historical events. But yeah, it's never been more timely. Um, it's kind of comical in a way, the way that they describe the disease, infectious, driving, dormant seed. I guess you got to make it sound scary for the Slayer album. But yeah, um, like you said, these guys weren't dummies.
No, no.
They,
I think
they
that they are a Trojan horse. Just appearances are very deceiving. These guys knew what they were doing. One thing I like about this song, Mike, is that the chorus, where he's doing, so you've got Tom doing this very precise diction and rhythm in his vocals, like waiting to unfold, raging uncontrolled, adapter potency, death machine. And in between, you've got the guitar chords punctuating. These guys, I just think they got it. Like it goes back to the rhythm, the really unusual rhythm, but it works. Like some jazz musicians, there's an extra, it's just the ability to, they have good ears, they've got good timing, they know when to put notes. I think these guys, they've just got this X factor that, where things, they don't do the cookie cutter four on the floor. They just do something a little bit different, but it works for the context of the song. And these crazy time signatures, these solos that at face value they sound like they're out of key, but they actually work because they're playing notes out of that particular scale. It's kind of, I'll go back and say it. It's kind of fresh jazz.
Yeah, and I won't disagree with you there. What I get a sense of is Slayer weren't interested in doing a lot of they were what they were hearing around them. That they were interested in pursuing something maybe a little bit more unique. Um, and I think it just came naturally from those two writers and those four guys playing together as youngsters, jamming and the sound coming out of them.
They
They
never
weren't,
sold out. They never sold out, Mike.
they never
I
sold
mean,
out.
all right, let's look at the big four. So Metallica
Right.
sold out.
Black Album and Load for sure,
Yeah.
unarguably.
Megadeth, they had their moments.
Cryptic Writings. Cryptic Writings is a hard rock album. Sue me.
Anthrax,
I think when John Bush, there's a song called "Safe Home" from one of the later John Bush albums. That's hard rock.
yeah. So arguably, this is the most pure heavy metal band because they have got their philosophy and they've stuck to it, and they haven't really deviated. Look, maybe one or two albums that weren't as good, but they've had a very steel, laser raised focus, and arguably, yeah, they're the most pure metal band. They've just
And
never really sold out.
I heard a song from one of their later albums, "Repentless," and "Repentless" reminded me of a lot of the stuff on Rain and Blood, as far as the speed and the delivery. It's like these guys they never lost it.
Absolutely. So, a couple other songs I'd like to talk about. Postmortem, um, Lombardo. It's fresh, but he's got a groove. He's in the pocket.
One of the things that a friend of mine told me to do was to give some songs from South of Heaven a listen after I was done with Rain and Blood. And yeah, you hear more of that groove, but it's here. It's definitely here on Rain and Blood as well, just sparingly. Um, and that's a remarkable thing about Lombardo. He's got that speed. He's locked in with precision when they're thrashing around, but then when they sink, they settle into that groove, and he's kind of feels like he's laying back a bit, and it's just man, you can really bang your head to that stuff. It's almost like he's got two gears on this album, and he uses both just equally well.
We've got to talk about the finale, Raining Blood. Oh my God, that start of that song is just magnificent. And for the folks that haven't heard this song before, it's got the sounds of storms,
Yeah.
thunder, these eerie squealing guitar sounds. It's a feeling of dread and something ominous is going to occur. it's all, as I said, it's all sound effects, but I think it's inspired that this is the start to the finale. What do you think about this song?
Well, I right from the very first time I heard it, and I might be completely wrong, but the way I see it, the outro with the thunder and lightning was directly an homage to Black Sabbath. Directly, intentionally. That's the way I'm hearing it, and I don't want anybody to tell me I'm wrong because that's the way I want it to be. I want that to be a direct homage to Black Sabbath. I liked this song a lot. Um, Trapped in Purgatory, lifeless object alive. This is so good. I may have heard this song a long time ago, back in the '90s. I think they might have released a live version as a single from the double live album that they did. Um, Whatever that was called, Decade of something. Um, I might have heard a live version of Raining Blood back then and really liked it, still like it. It's the perfect outro to this album. And in a way, it's kind of too bad that I bought this version that has two additional bonus tracks. It kind of ruins the listening experience of doing it on repeat, you know? Um, it's perfect as 10 songs. Bonus tracks kind of ruin it. Raining Blood is the ideal closer. And
But yeah,
I don't.
Raining Blood, I mean the song, it just crystallizes everything that's gone before. I think it's the perfect opener. Sorry, the
But
perfect closer to the
yeah,
song. It's a great bookend to Angel of Death.
yeah, and like I said, that's the way I was listening to it.
Yeah, I've been sort of processing what you were saying about Sabbath, and I never thought of it in that way, but I think you're right. But I think it may be sort of inspired without them thinking, hey, let's do this because it reminds us of Black Sabbath. I think it's because they've got all these influences, and Sabbath have to come into the mix. Anything that's heavy, um, Sabbath has got to be discussed as an influence, and I'm sure indirectly this is an influence for this album and in respect to this song.
And Rick Rubin pulled that thunder stunt again on the Black Sabbath 13 album, and that was most definitely intentional.
Yeah, and
But
that's a bit that was contrived.
that was contrived.
Yeah,
That was not in the same spirit as what I think is going on here.
and that's where Rick, when he, just going into the background of that album, where he said, he got the lads around and said, let's go back and record it like Black Sabbath. That's contrived. With this album, it's like they go into the studio, leaves them to their own devices, but he kind of navigates, helps them do another take, do this.
You
Whereas,
know how you know how I would make an analogy is that they already had the steel, they already had the blade, and Rick Rubin just sharpened it to a lethal edge, just like whatever those guys are that you see in the movie sharpening swords and knives. That was what Rick Rubin did to this band, this song in these songs in this album. Sharpened them.
absolutely. Bit of trivia. Did you end up listening to the Tori Amos version of Raining Blood?
Oh, I totally forgot, Peter. I
That's
apologize.
that's okay. I couldn't get through it.
Oh,
Yeah. I bought the album, folks. Tori Amos did a cover album, and she actually did a cover of this song, and it stretches it out, and you listen to it, and you wouldn't even know it's Rain and Blood. So it's one of her piano pieces, but she stretches it out to 6 to 7 minutes, and I actually had to get the lyric sheet and just follow it and go, yes, she's actually singing this song, but she deconstructs it. Um, so I sort of gave up after 4 minutes and listened to Professional Widow. So I prefer Tori to do that. Anyway, a little bit of a side issue. Um, Such an influential album. It's just I don't think we can sort of. I think this is just 29 minutes of complete mayhem, but beautifully recorded, and I think it's their finest moment, and it's probably one of the high watermarks of 80s metal.
well, may I ask you a question about your experience with this album?
My experience with this album was that, as I said, I had this, got into a lot of compilations like Speed Kills, and locally I was seeing bands like a band called Mortal Sin, Mayhemic Destruction, who were very Metallica orientated. In Sydney, there was a kind of a tight knit thrash scene, which was a hybrid of punk and metal. And there were bands like Mortal Sin, Slaughter Lord, and Sadistic Execution. But Slayer was always the common denominator. Everybody loved that album. And I can tell you, our collective minds were blown in 1986, when we um, heard this for the first time and bought it. So, um, and I've
Was it
listened to this
immediate
album.
for you, or were you like, I love
Absolutely,
this? Yeah, day one.
absolutely
Yeah.
loved it, because to me, I found it a step up sonically. Um, Arrangements, lyrically, songwriting, production, it was just a step up. And, to me, if people had their minds blown with Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, well, this was like a notch above. So, anyway, throwing it back to you, my friend, tell us about your final thoughts on this album. And is this a band whose catalog you would explore?
Yes. I'm gonna get South of Heaven next. I was told to try that one, and I really want the track Seasons in the Abyss. So I guess I'm gonna have to buy that album because this band has stubbornly refused to put out a greatest hits, if I'm not mistaken. There's no compilation I can go to, so I'm gonna have to buy albums for the songs that I want. Um, as for Rain and Blood, this is a hardcore listening experience. I tested it in the car a lot this week and at work of all places this week, and I found it to be a good experience. I think
Especially you
that
had a
this is,
shitty day at work, I tell you.
and you know what? I wasn't sitting there lazing my butt off at work. I was working. I was punching those keys, man. So I think this is a healthy album. I don't know how frequently I am going to listen to it in the future, to be honest with you, because it's not like I get the same kind of experience out of this as I do with a song that I'm singing along to. This isn't an album for songs that you sing along. No, it's not at all. You
You,
don't.
well, you probably want to bump into furniture and mosh in the pit.
Yeah, yeah. No, in short, you've made me curious to get more Slayer. I most likely will get South of Heaven next, and maybe that live Decade of Aggression. That's the title, Decade of Aggression. Maybe that's a good place to check out some songs as well. I'm glad I have it. It is a piece of history. Um, it's an important piece of that thrash metal puzzle. I now have a representation from all of the big four in my collection, which I think is important as well. Um, yeah, I am curious to keep going and see what I like next. I have a feeling that South of Heaven will really click with me because of that groovy aspect of Lombardo's drumming. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, once again, fantastic to have you on the show. And as I said, folks, this is an ongoing series. I'll pick something out of the genre of music. It could be, Mike does a ska album or reggae or I don't know, well, industrial. I love throwing things at Mike, and he sort of takes it up with aplomb. And I really appreciate your astute commentary today as a first-time listener to this wonderful album. So you can see Mike Ladano on Grab a Stack of Rock. Lots of great shows, and the 50 years of Iron Maiden, which I've done an episode, and I won't. I'll zip my lips. We'll just wait until that comes. He's also on the Contrarians with me. Folks, tell us what you think of Slayer, Rain and Blood. What do you think of Slayer? Your favorite albums? We love reading your comments. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. But one thing's for sure, Mike and I will be doing some more shows on the channel. And cheers, and we'll see you soon. All the best. See ya.